Before we start today's roundtable, I want to give special thanks to Checkster, our group sponsor. Checkster has become well known in the recruiting industry by providing a platform that easily captures reference checks in the hiring process. I myself have been a customer of theirs for years. I use a reference checking tool for all of my new hires. However, Checkster has now released a new product suite called Insights. This new product suite is really what has excited me to have Checkster as the group sponsor. With Insights, the Checkster platform now covers employees from cradle to grave and not just reference checking, starting when they apply, going to offer, through onboarding, then covering their work at your company, and then to the end with exit interviews. It's an easy to use, easy to understand way of giving and getting feedback from your peers. Checkster's simple goal, to build more productive and passionate teams. Now, if this concept of getting insights from your peers regarding your work sounds familiar, it should, because that's the simple goal of this group. Connecting, communicating, collaborating. Support me, support the group. Follow the link below, recruiting.org/Checkster. This will take you to a landing page to sign up for a quick demo. If you are just thinking about automating your reference checking process, it'll be well worth your time. But I encourage you to check out the full Insights suite. I'd love to find out if you feel the way I feel about it. Now let's get to today's roundtable.
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to join us. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about leveling the playing field and how to overcome internal equity issues. But before we get started, I just want to let you know that you can join us here every second Tuesday of the month at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time if you'd like to talk everything diversity, equity, inclusion. I am joined today by some really special panelists who will introduce themselves before the first time that they start speaking, so that you know exactly who they are. And just for your own information, if you received the notice today about what we're going to be talking about, the second point was creating pay equity standards. And I want to change that really quickly before we get started to read creating pay parity standards, which is different than creating pay equity. And we'll talk a little bit more about the difference between equity and parity in a moment. But let's just sort of jump in and get started, right? Being equal pay for the same job has been a discussion amongst us for a really long time, and especially when it comes to underrepresented minorities within any organization. And so let's talk about first, like, how do we understand what some of these gaps are and what some of the trends are? Any of us really utilizing data to help us do this? And please don't forget to introduce yourself first.
I guess I can jump in. I'm Dr. Emmanuel Archange-Bowles. I am the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Florida International University. And data, if it doesn't get measured, it doesn't get done, right? How can you know your reality and what the gaps are if you're not analyzing your numbers? And so we definitely at the university utilize our numbers. We have an affirmative action plan that we draft every year, that we work with an outside contractor to provide that information to the organization and do the statistical analysis across job groups and gender for us to see where we are, right? And so if you don't utilize data and analyze the data to help you be proactive in your compensation practices and as well as your recruitment practices, how can you really know where the gaps are, identify where those gaps are?
Yeah, totally. Thank you for that. So one of the things that I love to do for this group is give them actionable things that they can walk away with today. So Emmanuel, can you tell us what kind of data are you measuring? Like, what are you looking for when we're talking about specifically compensation? What data should folks be looking for?
Well, what we look at it is across job groups, like similar positions together. We look at it across gender, race and ethnicity. And when we're going out for recruitment, we're looking at our internal information, where we're looking at our internal equity in terms of salary, when we're establishing our posting ranges for our positions, bringing in people. And so in terms of data, that's what we look at when it comes to pay and equity.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for that. Is anyone else doing anything similar at their organizations where they're looking at data and sort of creating a foundation before even posting a position?
So that was kind of a question that I had for Emmanuel as to how you're approaching your compensation structure that way, because for us, we're not doing that. We look at it more at the pay grade per the position, not necessarily like where we're paying people within that grade, because we're not altering our pay grade based on that. We look at kind of like market trends, changes in cost of living, and that kind of, and making adjustments based on that. But that's an interesting take on creating equity across, the diverse candidates that we want to bring in. Where we're kind of measuring is more on the position levels and who we have and what roles at what level with across the organization, and how we can kind of bring the equity there. And I guess in turn, then kind of bring equity and pay when we do that, right?
Janelle, can I pause the conversation real quick, like slow-mo real quick? This is a perfect section to insert the difference between pay parity and pay equity. I think that you've actually verbalized it beautifully. I don't know if you meant to, but I don't know if that was on purpose, but what you just described is pay equity, right? We have grades, we go out to market, we pay folks within that range, right? And we try to make sure that everybody is paid similarly by creating the ranges. That's important. Right. That's important. But the other piece that I think Emmanuel is referring to is pay parity, which is, okay, now that we have people in range, how do certain folks in range, particularly minorities, right? And minorities can mean different things in different areas.
Right.
So particularly for minorities within range, how do they compare to a majority in that range? So within this particular range, how do my Black, Latinx women in some certain circumstances compare to a white middle-aged male getting paid in this range? Now, of course, we adjust for experience, etc., but that's pay parity. Same pay for same or similar work, right? That's pay parity versus pay equity, which is what are the standards for pay across the board for this position versus who's getting paid in that position.
Right. And I think that we had a previous conversation before we got started, but where you really need to empower the recruiters with the knowledge and understanding of how compensation is structured and what it means according to whatever your job description is, right? So we are competency based. So if somebody meets the job qualifications as listed on the job posting, then I don't care what they made before.
Right.
This is what's fair for this role and their level of experience. And here's where the justification comes in order to bump them according to their experience, additional preferred skills, and market, like what's happening in the market to in the supply and demand that may increase that, right? So for me, it's kind of stripping away while still being cognizant of like the dissonance, right? But stripping away any kind of biases and like looking at the facts, like this is where it's at, right? But also you have to make sure that you understand, and this is why we're looking at like who's in what position, to say, well, who's been given those opportunities to advance their skills and capabilities, right? So that like goes away from pay and more into like training and development, right?
Sure. And real quick, Janelle, can you tell us who you are? So
I'm with Children's Health in Dallas. I'm in HR recruiting.
Very cool. Very nice to meet you. And for some folks on the call who are in different states, in California, for instance, it's illegal to ask what you made previously. So that whole conversation looks different in the beginning of the recruiting cycle, right? And I think that's something that we should absolutely touch on, maybe even a little bit later, what that conversation looks like in the beginning.
Yeah, and that was something that I was going to reference too, is that you're not able to ask that in so many states now, not just California, but other states. So it's only a matter of time before it comes into your state. So you might as well just kind of create that practice now.
Yeah.
And for me, again, it doesn't matter. It matters what we value the position based on the pay grade that we created and what they bring, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Chris, are you all doing anything with data and pay grades and creating some standards there?
Yes, we are. I'm Chris Martin. I'm Director of Talent Acquisition at FabFitFun. We're headquartered here in Los Angeles. And I'm responsible for recruiting for the entire technology organization, which includes our product teams. And then I also double as the HRBP as well. And so to answer your question about do we use data, absolutely. In fact, we're going through this job leveling, job architecture exercise right now, where we're setting those levels, setting those bands across the organization. We're kind of using Radford data right now to kind of get us going. I think we're going to sprinkle in a little bit of our own kind of proprietary leveling as well. But I think the goal of the exercise is to get it as congruent as possible across the organization so that when we are hiring new people into the organization, the salary bands are set, the requirements are there. Equity is part of our package as well when you join FabFitFun. So we want to get those levels correct as well. So we're always looking at data to make those decisions.
Okay, and I just want to clarify for some folks that are maybe not that are on the call that are not in tech, right? So when you say equity is part of it, you don't mean pay equity, you mean parts of the business stock. Is that correct?
Excuse me, yes. When I say equity, part of our package is basically our package is salary plus equity, which means stock options. That's correct. We don't have annual bonuses or performance bonuses. We use equity as part of our compensation. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, super common in tech. Thank you so much for that.
Sure.
I just know that I'm in tech now, but when I wasn't in tech and we were talking about pay equity and then somebody mentioned equity as part of the package, I would always like my head starts
Right.
going. So thanks for that. So are you all also measuring, in addition to the salary bands, et cetera, where folks are sitting within those bands based on gender, ethnicity, et cetera? Are you doing sort of an annual or maybe twice a year evaluation of that? Or is that something that?
Yeah, I think we're constantly doing that. Like that's something that we're always paying attention to. I mentioned I'm responsible for the talent acquisition piece, but I've also been doing the HRBP part as well. And having access, as being mostly a recruiter in my career, having access to the other side of the business and understanding internal equity and understanding the gaps of the teams has really been beneficial in getting the teams correctly aligned internally from a compensation standpoint, from an equity standpoint. I think it's super important. As far as diversity goes, we're kind of fortunate because our business is a women's wellness lifestyle business. So our company's 70% female, which is great. But we can always get better, and that's our focus definitely going into 2021 is really paying attention to the pipelines when you have interviews and making sure those are diverse, right? And you have to make those intentional decisions. You can't hope that diverse people apply. You have to have actionable strategies to really get those to get diverse folks into the pipeline. But we're always paying attention to that. If the team have, in tech is a little hard, right? Tech can be a little more male oriented, I'll say. So, my main goal is to really try to make it as diverse as possible.
Yeah, it's brutal. Is anyone making, so I feel like most of us are creating pay standards that are both aligned with pay equity in terms of creating salary ranges and grades, et cetera, and also pay parity when it comes to the individuals in those ranges. Now, let's say there's gaps with the pay parity. Are any of us actually making adjustments? So we're looking at the data. What are we doing about the data? Tell me a little bit about your processes for that.
We want to make adjustments. So when we talk about compensation, let me preface this with saying, I spent 12 years in the talent acquisition realm before I was recently promoted to the director of DEI for our organization. And
congratulations.
Thank you. That came from after the George Floyd murders. murder. Our university president put a task force into play to kind of look at a reality across the board for our students, our faculty, staff. And so what came out of that was like a playbook of things that we need to do to get better as a university in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I say that to say, we also did a classification redesign, Chris, a couple of years back, where we wanted to align our job groups with market, and so we can establish fair ranges and things of that nature. It was a two-phase approach. The first phase was to get the classifications correct. The second phase is the pay piece of people who are internal, looking at market, where will we have to make adjustments? And yes, and with adjustments come money. And so if you work for an education public institution like I do, money and budget is always tight. And so, how do we make those adjustments on top of living wage adjustments that we have to make and things like that? So that's where we are now. Like we know we have adjustments that we need to make. What adjustments do we need to make? How do we make it? How do we make it? And it's fair. And that we're proactive, right? And not waiting for an employee to come and say, I'm not being paid equitably to a colleague in the same job group. We're being proactive in finding it and then going to our leaders and saying, hey, we need to make some adjustments. We could do it now, we could do it later.
We're going to do it. Nice. I like that. Is anyone else making actual adjustments with the data?
So I don't know that this necessarily is specific to diversity, but we definitely have areas that I support that we have recognized a need for an adjustment department-wide for the most part, because there is a recognition that in the long run, even though there is an upfront cost, in the long run, it is a cost savings because, like you said, like if you're not proactive, then you're in that reactive mode where you've got the cost of attrition is 1 to 4 times somebody's salary, right? So if you've got people leaving and it's costing you X, when you can, create a fair and equitable pay across the department to where they're generally happy, right? Otherwise, it's just, they just don't feel like they're fairly paid. And the data supports that, right? We need to make an adjustment before we end up losing our best people, right? Because typically you're not going to lose your worst ones, unfortunately.
Unfortunately. They tend to stick around.
Right. Yeah. So, and the whole kind of big bang approach, while some are okay with it, there are others kind of within the organization, like you need to get everybody on board. But when you get that no, it's like, okay, so let's go back to the drawing board and create maybe a more phased approach. Okay, so now what does that look like? And you have to dig in a little even more into the minutia to determine, okay, well, kind of where's the biggest risk, right? And where the biggest cost according to that risk would be associated. And that's kind of where you want to essentially strike first, and then kind of phase it out as you go. But that's still, something that we're continuing to work through, but it's certainly a conversation that we continue to have and are not allowing to drop.
Yeah, for sure. It's so important. And to be proactive about it, right? I know for us, we do a couple of pay parity exercises a year to make sure that folks internally are getting paid fairly, comparable to a white male, middle-aged male, if you will, doing the same job, which is so important. We make those adjustments and we don't care how much it is. It's like, found it, making the adjustment. And we don't wait until merit increase time, if you will. It's not tied to any sort of talent, performance review, anything like that. But this is what I will say. If you are, and you probably are, a TA professional listening in, you will probably need to work with your HRBPs on this, right? So while this probably won't be directly in your line of responsibility, here's how it's important to you. Because as you're recruiting people, and we talk about negotiation, and we talk about where people sort of end up in those ranges, it will either help or hinder your ability to continue to attract top talent based on where other people are in your range. So let's talk a little bit about the negotiation process, because that, I actually feel like that really affects pay parity in a pretty large way, especially if you're not in a state that doesn't prohibit you from asking about your previous salary. And then also, depending on how great somebody is at negotiating or not, are we offering the salary based on negotiation skills, right? Which then can create really big parity problems. So what are we doing? Tell me a little bit about your negotiation process and how that affects, or maybe doesn't affect, where people end up in range.
I'll take this one first, because when we recruit, our TA professionals are, in the beginning, we have a whole HR consultation with our hiring managers to include our compensation team. So we're talking together. We're setting the scene together and saying, hey, this is the minimum of the range, this is the maximum, right? So you can't go below, you can't go above. And so, yes, we get those people who apply even if they see the range, who want, say, I make X amount, and so this is where I want to be. One of the things that we've identified is, sometimes I've been at the university for 13 years, and so we help the managers by being the ones to make the offer to our candidates, we being our TA professionals. And so we're making the offer within the range based on experience and things like that. Of course, people will negotiate, but they're negotiating with your HR professional as opposed to your manager. And if we're going to go above the range, we work with our compensation department to say, hey, is this something we can do? And if we can't go above the range, we have other things like sign-on bonuses, or we talk about a total rewards package or tuition waivers to help negotiate that. We're a public institution, it's kind of hard with budget, but this is the only way we can be fair. We have about 11,000 employees, and so we have to make sure that we work hand in hand to ensure that there's not pay inequities coming in the door, because we have to deal with that with our current employees.
Yeah, it's kind of a pain to continue the same, we've identified the problem, and then we're going to continue to perpetuate the same problem by not adding a process in the middle. Exactly. Yeah, that makes sense. Is anyone else doing anything about the negotiation process, or tell me a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, so I think you brought something up that was really great in terms of, it shouldn't necessarily be based on who's a good negotiator versus who is not, because the data shows that more often than not, a male is gonna counter, and a female will most likely not. So, which isn't always the case, but a vast majority. So when you're having those conversations with your leaders, to anticipate a counter, and then ask, what are you okay with me accepting on your behalf, right? And again, having that HR professional have the conversation with the candidate, but I think setting expectations on the front end, like Emmanuel said, we don't necessarily pull our compensation team unless there's a consistent issue and challenge with a leader. Then at that point, we'll bring them in as kind of backup, so to speak, to reiterate the conversations, because we have internal conversations within HR to understand the process and the compensation structure as the way it's been built to be able to have those conversations. But they're right there if we need them as a partner. Same with the HR business consultants, to be able to kind of back each other up, so to speak. as to justification as to why we need to bring somebody in at a certain point, regardless of, what we've done historically, because markets change and, you have to change with the trends. And, you can't necessarily look at somebody who's been with the organization for 10 years and say, okay, well, we brought them in at that. Well, but you also had a different mindset and approach to compensation and hiring at that time that is no longer valid. And we need to change that, and we need to adjust that to today's market and standards. So it's all in having those conversations and adjusting expectations, and allowing them to recognize how things have changed and why we need to go forward in this manner, right?
Yeah. So I'm gonna ask y'all a question. Not trying to put y'all on the spot, but this is a fake real life scenario, right? So this is a scenario, and I'm asking so that the folks listening can get an understanding or also have something to think about throughout the day. So let's say you have an open director position. You know that you can go up to 150,000 for that position. You have two final candidates. One is a Latina woman who's traditionally been underpaid, right? And while obviously you can't ask her what she's made before, when you ask her her salary expectations, because she's been typically underpaid, she thinks that 110,000 will really, even though the position pays 150, right? So she says 120 because she thinks now she's going above and beyond. So she says, I'll come for 120. You also, that's one of your final candidates. Your other final candidate is a white man who's typically either overpaid or paid at market, right? So he says, look, I really like your company. I'd be willing to come in for 155. All right, you have 150. Now, you say to your hiring managers, I really think that we should go with the woman. She's fantastic, whatever. And her salary expectations are significantly less so that we have an opportunity to save on the budget. What are you offering her?
I'll respond to that. So, and that's a funny, or not funny, that's an interesting situation because it actually just happened.
Yeah.
And you're right. My first decision is to go with the female, with the the Latin woman, but keep in mind, a preface to all this is how they interviewed, the feedback from the team, how well of a fit does everybody think, and if it's absolutely even. I mean, personally, I'm just going to go with the diversity choice, just for me, specifically, just because I like to support, diverse candidates. As far as the salary goes, if I can go up to 150, that's insinuating that maybe the range is 140 to 150. I would probably go out at minimum at the 140 number, and I would probably do that because I like to leave room for people to come in, get used to the environment, and also give them a chance to excel at their role, possibly get a raise, mid-cycle, or maybe at the end of the year, but give them room to move up within their particular level, within their band. But I would not, if she said she needed 120, I'm not going to give her the 120. I'm going to get her up to that level that position deserves.
Cool. All right. I'm not going to bias the responses, so I'm not.
But Chris made a good point.
Who else?
Made a good point about the range, right? So typically our posting range aren't 10,000. We try to stick to a 10,000 spread as opposed to like 20 or 30,000.
Right.
That's just humongous. Like,
Right.
that's more of a band than it would be of a posting range or, salary range that we would be negotiating with a candidate or even posting. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Manuel, you're not helping anybody feel like they want to
I'm
go
sorry.
work for Publix.
I'm sorry.
No, but it's true. It's true. Because I know that I've had situations where people will put something below because we don't have to post our salaries, and we don't do that. But I've had instances where people put what they're requiring and it's below the grade, right? And I'm not going to tell any leader that they're asking for below the grade. I'm going to tell the leader, what do you think you should pay them for, and knowing kind of where. So I do put it a little bit into the leader's hand. And if I feel like they're, not being fair, then we'll have a conversation at that point. But I'm not going to lead with them expecting less than what the position I know what they would be willing to pay anybody else with the same level of experience.
Yeah.
And part of the process for me, we're a smaller company. We're a little over 600 people, but I like to include the managers in the high. Once we decide on a candidate, I like to almost bench the person. Once we decide like this is the person we're going to go with, I will have a conversation. Say, where does this person fit within the team? Let's say it's a data engineer. And I want to say, okay, we have 5 people on the team, just your opinion on the interview, where do you think they kind of fall out from a grading, a technical perspective? And our managers are aware of what the team makes. So, it helps when everybody's on the same page and everybody's aware of internal equity and all of, all that whole situation. I think it kind of helps when you're bringing people into the organization.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll be devil's advocate.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead. Play devil's advocate. Go ahead.
I'm not gonna lie, right? So if we have minimum of so we set a minimum, so we're not gonna go below the minimum. So say that. But if you're a candidate and our range is like 140 to 150, and you say if we offer you 140, we typically want to offer you where if you walk on water above our minimum qualifications, then we want to pay you towards the top of the range. But we typically kind of start low because we want to leave room for negotiation. We're a public institution. So we want to leave room as an organization to make the first offer. And if somebody wants to negotiate a salary, so we have room to move without hitting the top of the range.
Look, that brings up a good point. Because what happens if the candidate doesn't negotiate? Then are you perpetuating the pay parity issue?
Probably.
Like I'm interested in that.
So, I mean, but that's it. You do bring up a good point, because sometimes it's not about the candidate. It's about the fiscal responsibility that you have as an organization too, especially in not-for-profits, So sometimes it's not about the candidate. And it's more just about, this is the department, this is the budget that we have right now, right, for this particular position. And it's not that you're trying to perpetuate anything, like there's no malintent behind it. It's just, it's something that this is where you're at right now. And I think that brings up the importance of, looking at that across the year and saving budget for those types of things that are identified throughout the year.
Mm-hmm. I think it's
I also teach, right? I teach a class in our College of Business. And so I teach a recruitment and staffing class, and I teach a HR management class. And what I teach my students, because I know there's pay gaps still amongst women. Research show women get paid 81 cents to the dollar that a male makes. African-American male would get paid, 87 cents to the dollar that a white male makes, and a Hispanic male like 90 cents to the dollar that a male makes. So we know this, right? And so it's important that as we mentor individuals, going into the workforce, or if we teach them to negotiate. Companies are expecting you to negotiate during a recruitment process. And so I always say a closed mouth don't get fed. So if you do your research about a company, if they have a salary range that's posted, know your worth, know what you would bring to this position, and go in and ask for what you're worth, as opposed to, staying silent. So.
Yeah. And I think that's where the beautiful balance comes in, right? Because I was going to make that point too, Emmanuel. If you're listening to this session today, and tell all your friends too, especially if you're a woman, if you are going to find another job, you negotiate, you counter the offer. I don't care if you're getting an extra 10 cents. You practice that muscle and you practice it again, right? But I think the other side of that is the responsibility of the company, right? So it's one thing if you're coming in as a candidate, it's another thing if you're coming in as the organization, right? And as the organization, it's important to say, okay, our compensation standards can't be as much candidate focus as it is position focus. We're paying for the position, we're paying for the impact. We have to trust that the candidate that we're going to pick, right, meets the standards of the impact that we've already established. And we have to be willing to pay fairly within that range, not based on, okay, they say they wanted 120, so we'll give them 125, they'll be happy, even though I know I have XYZ amount of extra money, and more importantly, other folks in the organization that were perhaps better negotiators or had a better pay history, right? Because now we're perpetuating the same issues that they came in with before. What I'd love to do is take this question from the chat, and I'll answer it first, and then I'd like for everybody else to sort of give their answer as well. It's from Vera Gardner, who said, would you advocate for a Latinx or a Black person who may have one less skill than the white person, an opportunity to grow and increase minority representation, or a skill that's not as developed? And I think this goes beautifully with Chris's comment, which was that he was always going to advocate for an underrepresented candidate, with all other things being considered. And I look at it slightly differently, right? And I think about it in terms of balance on the team. So when I'm talking to hiring managers, I say, okay, let's look at your team and let's talk about what perspectives are missing, what clients can you not serve, what new customers can you not get, what algorithms can you not write without being biased because you don't have that perspective on your team. And let's hire for that perspective, right? So if that means that somebody that will have that perspective has 90% of the skills that maybe a white person that's had more opportunity and access has 100% of the skills, I'm going to go with the perspective that I'm missing, because if I hire anybody else, I'm still missing the big piece of my business that needs to be filled. A big chunk of my clients and customers that I can't reach, I still won't be able to reach without that perspective on the team. But I'd love to get y'all's perspective on on that question as well.
Finger snap,
Why-
Christina.
oh.
You said it beautifully.
Thank you.
No, you did.
no.
You did. I think, when you're sitting with that hiring manager and you're having that initial kind of kickoff meeting, right? And you're trying to understand the gaps, as you said, and what's needed on the team from a skill perspective, depending on the skill, I mean, going back to the question in the chat, I mean, it depends on what the person's bringing to the table. You're going to have required skill sets, backgrounds for this role. It's the way that it is. But if it's let's say like a nice to have skill set and they both have the core skill sets, and maybe, the male person has, the male white guy has done some of the nice to haves, but the diverse female has not, and they're just kind of extras. I think in that case, like a case like that, I think is a good example to maybe, this is a chance for them to pick up some of those nice to haves, but they have the core skill set. So let's go with that candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I like the candidates that, we're giving them something, right? It goes back to like the employee value proposition. If you have somebody that meets all the requirements and has some of the nice to haves, what are we giving them? How long are they going to stay? What kind of longevity? What kind of, like, how excited are they going to be about being in this role, right? Versus somebody who is coming in and they're going to stretch because they maybe haven't had this experience before, but that's something that we give to them outside of the money and the equity or what have you, right? That's a value proposition that we have for them. We're going to create longevity with that individual, and they're going to give me more, the organization more, right? More of themselves, and they're going to feel more fulfilled as well, right? So absolutely, I'm going to advocate for them. I think the organization is going to be better off. The people who are provided those quote unquote easier opportunities or more frequent opportunities, just based on their socioeconomic status that they came from, I have found them to not be quite as resilient as, some of us who had to fight for it a little bit more.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I think there's a big value add with the retention rate of folks that are coming in that might have to learn 1 or 2 extra skills because there's a certain loyalty that's there. The other thing, I mean, even to Chris's point about certain skills needing to be had, especially in tech, right? I can't hire you as an engineer if you don't know how to code. Like there's certain minimal skills, but there are other positions like sales, marketing, other things where a lot of it could be competency based. I can't hire a VP based on only competencies, but I can hire at other levels in a lot of ways that are based less on hard skills and more on, does this person present these certain competencies? Have we seen this skill demonstrated in their past so that we can reasonably expect that if we teach them a skill, they will demonstrate the same competency that we need moving forward as well, which also can really help us to open the playing field when it comes to the types of candidates we'll hire and the type of opportunity and access that we require that those candidates already had in order for them to have it in the future. So, all right, cool. So we're over by about almost 15 minutes. We always do this though. So if you ever log on to this session, you probably should expect this to go a little bit over every time. I won't keep you for the whole hour though, but what we will do is sort of a flash lightning round. So if you have any burning questions, we'll give you 30 seconds to add them to the chat. We'll take a few of those questions and do a last minute lightning round. Ready? Go. Hit us. This is going to be an awkward wait, but we'll give you 30 seconds, I think. Anyone? Chris, where do you find your underrepresented candidates? By the way, I always say underrepresented. A candidate is not likely to be diverse. A pipeline can be diverse. A population of anything can be diverse. But unless you have a candidate that has like 3 different intersectionalities, a Black, gay, female, who, is an immigrant, unless you have that, usually when we say diverse candidates, what we really mean are underrepresented minorities, right? Underrepresented candidates. So I'm going to just replace your word, Vita. Sorry. So Chris, where do you find your underrepresented candidates?
One place that I find them is I actually use LinkedIn Recruiter pretty extensively, and I create a project in LinkedIn, and I put a list of HBCs in that list along with some industry related companies that I use, and that helps me start sourcing from that pipeline.
Cool. Any affiliate do you use any affiliate tagging or anything like that, where maybe you see, like in the tech world, let's say they're part of Dev Color or something?
Not necessarily that. I mean, we're actually putting together our strategy for 2021, whether that's posting on, Black Society of Software Engineers, or whether we're using a diverse recruiting firm, or we're kind of still deciding what we want to do, because we definitely want to invest in that area. But for right now, what's worked for me is to directly source, like intentionally go after the folks that I'm looking for and get them into the pipelines.
Guys, yeah. Anybody else?
That's the best way, Chris. Like, you're paying a lot of money to go to there's tons of different diversity boards out there. And you should at least advertise in at least 2 different diverse sources. If it's closer to the industry, it's like an affiliation of the industry, like an affinity group within the industry you're looking to recruit, you should at least do that. But that direct reaching out to the underrepresented minorities that you are looking for, specifically to diversify your department or whatever, that's, I find, to be the best key to finding passive candidates who may not have known of your role because they're not looking. So right. I use LinkedIn all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
if you have not invested in LinkedIn Recruiter, I know that some small organizations haven't. If you've not invested in LinkedIn Recruiter, even if you only have the little one seat, even if it's not the huge corporate package, it's totally worth it when you're looking to really target candidates. So
They
something
have
that,
like 80% of the workforce is on LinkedIn.
yeah, it's insane, right?
That's,
Like, especially
within
now,
the US.
everybody,
Yeah.
everything is virtual now. Everybody's
Yeah.
on LinkedIn. So
Yeah.
any specific companies or job boards you would suggest to source from anyway?
Depends on what you're looking for. I'm in higher ed, so I typically, do our diversity, higher ed, academic diversity groups, but it's specifically based on the role. If you're looking for IT focus, there's different groups. I love that you all reach out to HBCUs. I'm an HBCU product, and so there's a number of students. And hey, Rattlers, minority serving institutions as well. There's other institutions that aren't HBCUs, but they serve a large population of minority underrepresented groups. So FIU is one. We serve a large population of Hispanic students. So great program. If y'all looking to post with us, link with me on Facebook. We'll definitely get you to the right people to get you in front of our students.
Cool. Somebody mentioned Techeria for tech. If you're looking for other tech ones, Vets in Tech is really good. Out in Tech is fantastic. Afrotech is more of a conference, but you can partner with them throughout the year to do different things. Those are some. We also partner with Techeria at Reddit. So those are some of the ones in tech. I'm probably more familiar with those. And if you're in entertainment, the Academy, so like the Oscar Academy, they have a fantastic program for interns. It's called the Academy Gold. And what I will also say is that if you are looking to really make a difference in terms of your diversity within the organization, it's important to have a really complete and inclusive internship program, but it's also really important to be intentional about your leaders that you recruit. And the thing is that a lot of times leadership positions become open less often, but when you hire leaders that have diversity of thought, background, ethnicity, all the things, right, you can also expect them to have a network of people that they can help bring in that will fill some of your middle management, right? And then your interns will fill some of your lower levels, and then hopefully you can meet in the middle somewhere. So, all right, well, this is the conclusion of today's session. This is our last session for the year, but starting in January, you can expect to see us every second Tuesday of the month at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'm Christina Sharif, your moderator and also the head of diversity, inclusion, and belonging at Reddit. And thank you so much to the panelists for joining us today. And thank you to all the attendees for joining us. We appreciate you. Have a great holiday weekend, or
Happy
not
holidays.
weekend, but
Thanks.
next 2 weeks.
We get you.
See you
Thank you
guys.
for having
See you
us.
later. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.